We've made it. It is episode 2 of Rucks, Mauls, and Oval Balls. We have somehow managed to survive 7 whole days and been able to come back and still talk to each other and host yet another episode of this podcast. I'm Statman Dave, and here's some episode 1 stats for you all. Episode 1 has been listened to across the world, downloaded in 3 different countries, over 50 different cities. Literally, we jokingly said last week our listener was applauding. We can actually confirm with some degree of confidence that we have more than one listener. So all we can say is thank you for the excellent feedback we've had off the back of episode 1 from everyone that's listened and kind of got in touch. And all we can say is we plan to carry on in this fashion.
Absolutely.
And this time we're going to start off by just saying, Rory, how's your week been? How's your week been since being released to this world of rugby social media?
Well, it's been fantastic. I've been able to get even more monocultural than I was before. And now I can solely focus on rugby rather than having to worry about dipping my toe in other areas of society that I couldn't possibly care about. I can purely spend my time talking about, watching, and thinking about rugby, and it's been an absolute dream.
Well, needless to say, we are not letting this very, very small level fame, of which there is none, get to our heads. And episode 2 is purely going to be focusing on what we've just had, the last round 3 of the European Champions Cup, the European Challenge Cup, and then we can't help but dip our toes in to the Six Nations. The England squad has just been announced, and we're going to dig deep into that and answer a few questions off the back of that, as well as some other questions around it. So that is the order of play today for episode 2 of the Rucks, Balls, Over Balls podcast. Before we get into everything, I want to ask you a question, Rory. I want to ask you about your opinions on the number of subscriptions and the general cost required to watch rugby from the comfort of your sofa. How do you feel about the multiple subscriptions and it being spread across multiple services? Do you feel it's a good or bad thing?
I think, the cost is an issue, right? You know, if you've got, as a minimum, you'll need TNT and Premier Sports to watch club rugby, right? And if you're as obsessed as us, you will need access to Sky Sports for certain competitions as well. I think the main issue is it doesn't feel like, as a sport, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for people to access the games. And I've got to be honest, I wasn't entirely impressed with the quality of broadcasting over the weekend. Not so much the commentary. The commentary, I think, is fine, largely. But the actual quality of the feed in at least 2 of the games that I watched was poor. In the Sale game, the sound and the video didn't sync. So every time you listen to a referee call, it was 3 or 4 seconds after it happens on screen, which makes the viewing experience pretty poor. The Quins game lost the last 10 minutes of the first half, and the quality of the video feed in the second half was pretty poor. And I've got a bugbear about broadcasting companies not sending their teams to the location.
Yeah.
ITV did it in the last World Cup, and it made for, I think, quite a poor show.
I completely agree. And that was across rounds 2 and 1 as well. And it's not just Premier Sports that is always guilty of this. There's obviously some channels that do it better than others. But I certainly think for the Champions Cup, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of European rugby, you'd like to think something as simple as having audio and video aligned would be kind of made sure to happen.
Yeah, and you can't talk about the benefits of having the South African teams in the competition and then not send your teams out there to actually experience it. You get no sense of the occasion. The real thing is, growing up, this competition was the pinnacle. and
Yeah.
it was genuinely something you look forward to week on week. You couldn't wait for the European games.
Hmm.
Whereas now it feels a little bit more like this the stopgap before I get back to watching the Premiership.
To me, that feels the perfect segue. So let's actually go and look at the round of rugby because I think it's also relevant to that how some squads and some teams, much like the broadcasters, aren't taking the competition seriously. Let's dig into it. So Friday night, kicking off the round, I thought it actually kicked off quite well. Quite a good game, generally to watch. Glasgow versus Racing. For me, the headline that came out of this was: Is this what we're going to be seeing in Australia in the summer 2025 for the Lions in the centres with Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones running the show? What are your thoughts, Rory?
Well, Glasgow are a really strong outfit, and you can see that kind of DNA that has come through to the national side. They've got a really strong sense of how they play. They've got a very strong pack. They're a really good mauling side, and then outside of that, they've got some real ballers in the back line. Tuipulotu and Hugh Jones are superb. I mean, if they were picked at 12 and 13 in the Lions, I don't think anyone would have major complaints about it, particularly with the likelihood that Finn Russell's going to be at 10. Racing are continuing to kind of flatter to deceive. The poster boys for champagne rugby in many ways. The Parisian team, great stadium, very stylish, some very exciting players on there, but not really clicking to the sense of actually tackling this competition. But taking nothing away from Glasgow, they were fantastic. They scored some fantastic tries in lots of different ways, but the quality that they have on show should give them some good confidence that they can go quite deep in this competition if they want to.
I think Glasgow are one of maybe 5 or 6 teams who I think are a confident bet on getting towards the latter stages. I agree, maybe winning's a step too far, but they've certainly got a team to kind of mix it with the best. But ultimately, that game ended Glasgow 29, Racing 19. A little shout out from an English perspective that Junior Kapoku showed up well, I felt, for Racing, showed a real physical performance and showed himself to be kind of able to play at this level. But ultimately, as you say, Racing just aren't at the races at the moment in Europe or domestically in France, and were just beaten by the better side on the day, 29-19. Moving on, we referred to earlier how sides are kind of throwing the towel in. I wasn't expecting this result, but Stormers versus Sale turned out to be a little bit of a one-sided affair.
It was a strange one, really strange game, this one, because Sale took pretty much as strong a side as they could out there. They had a very strong side out. And actually, for certainly at least the first half, had they been able to catch anything other than a cold, they would have been well in this game. But they developed a severe case of crab hands. There were some interesting points in it, though. Bevan Rod absolutely handing it to Frans Malherbe, the starting tight end for South Africa. I've got him down as winning that 3-0. And Malherbe ultimately got sin-binned.
Yes, couldn't agree more. That was delightful to watch.
But yeah, honestly, Sale were their own worst enemy. The handling skills were, I mean, honestly, if from a professional team, the handling skills were actually unacceptable. But all credit to the Stormers. They took every opportunity they could. Manny Lebuc, he was exceptional. He scored one fantastic try where he ran it in from fairly improvised up and under. But he absolutely run the show the whole day. Gallant at fullback again was outstanding as well.
Yeah.
But the Stormers were clinical. They took every opportunity that was presented to them.
Yeah, and so for any listener that isn't aware of the end result, it ended 40-0 to the Stormers, which in rugby terms is a little bit of a stuffing. Talking of little bits of a stuffing, Exeter Chiefs versus Bordeaux.
This was something of a pantomime at points. The French playing the role of the French, scoring some utterly French tries.
Yes.
There's one I've just got here at one point. Bordeaux taking the piss. When Penaud, when he's about to cross the try line, throws a 20-meter pass inside to Jalibert to put it under the sticks. They really were just taking the piss out of them at that point.
Absolutely. Bordeaux, for me, are my favourite team to watch in the top 14, bar none. I love the way they play. I love the way they throw the ball around. Borderline arrogance, maybe.
Borderline.
Let's,
Borderline.
let's not,
Abject
let's
arrogance.
not start a cross-channel,
I loved
war of
it.
words.
I loved it.
It's brilliant to watch.
Yeah, Maxime Lucu was shredding Swiss cheese defense, which is not a great metaphor, but it was my thoughts in that moment. He was unplayable. I mean, the idea that he's not the best nine in France is sickening.
The
But they,
number of excellent nines in France is sickening. I'll tell you that.
it,
All I'll say about Luku, he is a two-way player. His attack and his defense is unreal. His tackle numbers are
yeah.
insane in the Champions Cup. He's up there with all the best back rows.
Do you know, he puts me in mind of someone like Aaron Smith.
Hmm.
So he's not spectacular in the way that Dupont is. He doesn't do just these mad things that you couldn't possibly predict. He does absolutely everything to the highest level of skill and ability, and he keeps that team ticking over so well. And when you've got someone like Jalibert at 10, you got Penaud, you got Biabere, Mofana in the centres, and a monster pack.
Yes. And I think it's that consistent performance he delivers, which is why they are so relentless.
Yeah.
When they click into that gear, they will keep scoring because he keeps delivering that level. And that's how it ended up with a 69-17 final score, was it? Or 13? 69-17.
Yeah, and away from home.
Away from home. Sandy
All
Park.
the old jokes about the French teams not travelling, to be honest, are dead because the French travel now.
They do. What about Exeter?
You and I had a conversation about this where you felt that Exeter weren't that bad, and I have to.
I will clarify, but carry on.
Look, what I thought watching Exeter was that there are real systemic issues, right? We talked about this last week. Slade at 10 isn't working. He stands way too deep because he's not a natural 10, so he doesn't get flat enough to the line. He's not in movement, and which means their pods are completely static and too deep. They're not fixing players, and they're going wide too early to players who frankly don't have the ability to break down a defence as good as Bordeaux's in a one-on-one system against a set defence. So that's a systemic problem. Yeah. But frankly, watching it, they don't work hard enough. If you watch the way that Bordeaux attack, the amount of off the ball work they do to support the play, the reason why they score so many tries, they look so silky and it's so seamless, is if you look at the amount of running off the ball they do to make sure they're in the right place at the right time for those amazing offloads and those great running lines, it's obscene. They are absolutely backing themselves to score every try, and they put the effort in to do that. Maybe it's not working hard enough's harsh. Maybe it's that they're just confused about their system or their patterns.
So this is where So when I say they weren't that bad, I think to a man, player by player, they kept trying. I think the failure is in the systems and whatever they have in place to try and match and react to their opposition. I think whatever that is isn't working. If you were to look at the numbers, Bordeaux had to do more tackles than Exeter. That tells me by itself, yes, Exeter are probably receiving a lot of kickoffs because they've conceded a lot of tries, but they will keep trying. The problem is they didn't have the ideas, the creativity, or anything to unlock Bordeaux. And the only problem is their defensive system was so easily unlocked by Bordeaux. So that's what I said they weren't that bad. I think to a man they weren't that bad. I think the way they're playing at the moment just doesn't do them justice, and it's just not going to click the way things are.
My argument there is, I mean, they had a lot of ball and they made a lot of carries. Yeah, Bordeaux had to make a lot of tackles, but it was so easy for them because if you watch the carries they were making, the they were going left and right. And when I played, we called it mechanics, just going left and right because they're not getting around the corner. They're not stretching the defense. It was so easy for them to defend it.
Yeah, there is no creativity.
None, and they've got to take a real look at it because at the moment, against an even halfway good defense, they're gonna come second best. And the shining lights, Brown Bampo obviously scored one fantastic try. Actually scored two really good tries. The first one though was very spectacular, the 90-meter sprint.
Yeah,
Boots filled with people just towards the end, but
I love watching those moments because it reminds me it's not just the forwards that sometimes run out of gas towards the try line.
yeah, I ran out of gas much further from the try line.
Yes, it's usually
much closer to the
near
first
my
whistle.
own. Yeah, but no, I completely. Paul Brown Bampo, he looks a real find. He's just kind of come out of nowhere. I know he's kind of dual registered with Plymouth this year. Really keen to see if he gets more game time, especially if they were both so injured. That's
and Russ Tuima, when he came on, I thought was very good.
Yes.
He did try. He made a lot. He made a real effort.
Yes.
The tour at 12, I thought was good for the time that he was on. The number 8 Fizzalau,
yeah.
I think he looked really good.
So all those players there, these are players that in my head I thought, even though they're losing and being thrashed, those players' heads did not drop. So if you're listening, Exeter Chiefs, there are glimmers of hope. And if you're a Chiefs fan, there are glimmers of hope. Fully appreciate how frustrating it must be this season. Next game, billed as DuPont's trip to the Southern Hemisphere to go prove a point. Sharks versus Toulouse.
Yeah. An interesting game as well. I mean, probably flattered to deceive a little bit in terms of the spectacle that some were hoping for. Not helped by the conditions. 30 degrees and 85% humidity is quite literally
hell.
Your worst nightmare.
Yes,
yeah,
absolute
it's utter hell. So I had a great deal of sympathy with the Toulouse team having to put up with that. But there were flashes where they were fantastic. Tomo Ramos, in particular, I thought was incredibly impressive. The offload for Blair Kinghorn's try in the corner was absolutely outrageous. And Dupont, I think you've got to say that Dupont showed everyone in South Africa why the rest of the world considers him to be the best player.
He had enough glimpses to kind of really say, look, this is me, this is my game, this is what they're talking about. I also felt the Sharks went with a slightly weakened team selection as well. I think before kickoff, my excitement levels kind of reduced a little bit on the team announcements. But yeah, so that game, so Toulouse versus the Sharks ended 20 points to Toulouse, 8 to Sharks. Then we're on to a very good watch in Munster versus Saracens, if you like watching the sort of rugby we like watching.
Yeah, you'd bill this as one for the purists, right? We have to say that we've got egg on our face this week after what we said about Munster. I mean, I still maintain this is not the Munster team of old in terms of quality, but my God, they are dogged. And Tormund Park had a serious atmosphere. I was watching the game thinking, right, that is clearly about -4 degrees. It looks wild. And I was like, I can't imagine anywhere I'd like to be more.
Yes, it looked good fun to be there. Maybe not so much on the pitch, but definitely in the stands.
brutal physicality. This was really a game of two defenses, and ultimately, Saracens were the team that had no answers. They just resorted to an up and under game. It was after the way that we talked them up last week in their performance against Bristol. They really reverted to type in this one, didn't they? They just sort of kick and chase.
That was the exact tactic that they resorted to when they handed Northampton Saints a tough defeat at the StoneX. It wasn't working for them on the day, and it's not been like Saracens this season where they've seemed to be able to always score a try when they've needed to. But to be able to, for Munster to prevent them from getting over that try line at all in that game is pure testament to that Munster team, who to me, looked like a team that was defending as a unit. They were defending for each other. It's lovely to watch. As you say, it's for the purist.
Yeah, they look like they had a real point to prove. They must have listened to the podcast last week.
You're welcome, Munster. But
Yeah,
whatever was said at Thomond Park before the game, halftime, worked. So this game, as we say, one for the purist, pure defense versus defense. There's nothing. There's not a lot there when you're watching the highlights package that's going to make you think, "Ooh, that's an exciting spectacle."
Yeah.
But it ended 17-12 to Munster. Then we move on to what is probably the other side of the equation of pure defensive brilliance from two teams to what is an absolute crazy game between Stade Francais and Northampton Saints.
Again, another game where we got our predictions completely wrong.
This is one of the perils of doing predictions before team announcements, but I still feel it's one that's got away. Ultimately, discipline and set piece let Northampton down in the middle 40, so the last 20 and the first 20 of the first and second half respectively. Stade just were absolutely up for it. The second they got a sniff that they could pull off this comeback from being 21-0 down, and they caught wind that they could do something special for their fans, which, let's face it, they're not having a great season in France. And a quite inexperienced, rotated Northampton Saints squad didn't have much just weren't able to answer that physicality.
You might have some more insight on this. The reasons for rotation. Was it just a case of they thought they could go there and win with a bit of a second string side? They just weren't targeting this one, or are they really contending with injury issues?
So it's a little from column A, a little from column B, I'd say. There's definitely injury issues at the moment. Obviously, we saw last week Alex Coles, Timo Mijanov and Nuo both went off with HIAs in the same head clash incident. George Hendy went off with a shoulder injury. There's been a couple of other injuries in the week. So it's definitely a case of balancing the squad and managing some fitness. But I'm never one to throw too many excuses out there for a loss. Ultimately, got the bonus point. There are some real bright points to take out of, like Henry Pollock. Had a great game. I thought Tarek Hafar had a great game when he was on the pitch. But ultimately, this is one that's got away from Northampton. It may have been a 12th try thriller. Thankfully, it has secured qualification for Northampton to the next round. Next weekend will be where it's decided where in the table they finish. It ended 45-35 to Stade Francais on the day, who will be absolutely buzzing with that victory. And it's kind of made that group very interesting going into the final round. Leicester Tigers versus Ulster Rugby.
The first half, it was a poor first half. But in the second half, Tigers really spluttered into life. They actually played some very nice rugby, scored some very nice tries. Freddie Stewart was absolutely superb. I think he was the real difference maker, really, across the pitch. Ulster were quite poor. I think they're in quite a poor moment, really.
Yeah.
By all accounts, and it really showed the lack of quality there. But there was some Tigers performances to be really pleased about. So Freddie Stewart being one. Andre Pollard was excellent as he always is, just absolutely metronomic in 10 and really controlled the game. The one I was really excited to watch was Finn Carnduff.
Yes.
Who I think was in the under-20s World Cup winning side last year.
He was.
Looked every bit to the manner born. He looked really, really strong. He looked like he had the physicality for those kind of games, which was really impressive for someone of his age. I think he rearranged a few ribs.
And he's a leader. So he was a captain in the under-20s. And I think he displays that when he plays, because he leads by example. He's his defence and his physicality, which is really good to see.
I mean, in the first half, so I've got Tigers their own worst enemies in the first half, and if you watch them, they lose their structure so easily, and it reminded me that in a week or two before, one of the in-game interviews I did with one of the coaches was saying that they don't worry too much about getting into structure quickly when they get the ball. It's about taking the space and everyone reacting to it.
Right.
And actually, when they went back to a more structured type game plan, they broke Ulster down quite easily in the second half.
Yeah.
Josh Bassett scored a hat trick in what was otherwise quite a poor performance, I thought, from Josh Bassett. It's weird to say he scored 3 tries and didn't play that well,
Sometimes
but he
it's just
looked
about being in the right place at the right time when you're away.
which he was a few times, but he also wasn't on several occasions as well. And I was watching it thinking, I mean, you scored 3 tries and you still kind of look like you might be the weak spot in the team, but
there's a reason he didn't get man of the match with a hat trick. But that ended Leicester Tigers 38, Ulster 10. Moving on swiftly, Cast versus Bulls.
Not much to say about this one. Cast were good. Cast were really good.
As we predicted, Cast at home, very tough to beat. It also confirmed in my mind that the Bulls have completely written this year's Champions Cup off. They may even be aiming to be bottom of the group, so they don't have to worry about the Challenge Cup.
If you do want to watch anything from this game, check out the try scored by 36-year-old Dumora, scoring a proper NRL-style finish in the corner. It was superb, absolutely gymnastic.
But that ended 49-10 to Bulls. Big win for Cast. Again, in that weird group at the moment, that's got Northampton Saints, Munster Saracens, Cast, Bulls and Stade Francais, and it's all very close. But I feel like Bulls are just trying to finish last in that group. Moving on to what I thought was an absolutely humdinger of a game. Toulon versus Harlequins.
Yeah, this was really, really entertaining, as long as you aren't a Quins fan, which I'm not, so I was quite happy to enjoy it.
Definitely helped.
Yeah. Look, Toulon were serious, right? You know, and this isn't the Toulon that won back-to-back European Cups, right? They're not the Galacticos. This is a serious side with some serious players. A good English contingent of Carl Sinclair, Dave Ribbons, Lewis Ludlam, who were all really, really good, all performed really well.
Yeah.
And Batsy Serran at 9, another French scrum half who for me, you just dream of having for England. He was fabulous to watch, and he always is fabulous to watch. But he's not quite as parochial as he was in his younger years when he had a big gaff in him. He was absolutely superb. For Quins, I think they made a real error not starting Will Evans because they just couldn't slow Toulon down.
Yeah.
I would have had Will Evans in for Kenningham, who was a little bit quieter. Chisholm had another good game. He carried on really good form, but I think they missed having someone there who could slow down the rucks. But again, really, ultimately, it was a quality issue. They just couldn't match Toulon man for man, and it really starts in the pack for them. Finn Baxter had a much better game. He looked better for it. He was strong in the scrum. He was good around the park. He can be pleased with the way that he went. But as a unit, the forward pack was just absolutely outclassed. But some positives. So Finn Baxter was good. Murley was very good. He looks nuggety. He sat down at his opposing winger a few times. He's looked really physical. He made some really good clean breaks. So I think a performance that probably earned his recall.
Yes. And considering his opposing winger, correct me wrong, was Vinokola, who is he's a physical winger himself. I also enjoyed that moment where Ben Waghorn came off the bench and rearranged a few ribs.
Yeah, I think I did. I wanted to mention that. Yeah, the lad that he slotted. Okay, nah, just be ribs, mate. You got to be good.
Yeah, that game ended Toulon 33, Harlequins 21. The game that we were expecting to be the game of the round. I'm not sure it quite lived up to those expectations. But La Rochelle versus Leinster.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was game of the round in terms of how absorbing it was to watch.
I certainly felt it was test match level of intensity at moments, which is good to see.
Yeah, that's what it looked like to me. It looked like a test match. Not loads of outrageous jouet and unbelievable tries. It was so physical. I mean, the quality level was extremely high, but on both sides of the ball. Yeah. The attack was great, particularly La Rochelle, I thought attacked really well, but the Leinster defence was just a brick wall. It was so good. I mean, Ryan Baird in particular, I thought was outstanding, and Caelan Doris actually. I think were both outstanding.
Yeah.
It was, ultimately, again, probably one more for the purists than
Yeah.
necessarily for the highlights reel. But if you want to watch the club game played at the very top, it's often like this. There was no real disparity between the two teams. La Rochelle would be disappointed not to have won it because they certainly could have, and Leinster will be thrilled to have held them out. But this one could have gone either way. What I did want to bring up on this was how good was it to see Jack Nowell again? He was brilliant. I thought he played. I think he was one of the best players on the pitch.
Best I've seen him play for a very long time, probably since that double winning Exeter season. He looked unbelievable. It kind of makes you yearn for how good he was and how good would he be in the England squad.
He's such a good player. He's such a good player. I love watching him play. He's got that kind of NFL running back style to him. He's just involved constantly. He's nuggety. He's slippery. I love it. He'd be a player who'd be straight back in my squad. I love watching him play.
To say it now, outside Lions pick.
I mean, it wouldn't be a bad shout, would it?
But ultimately, it ended 16-14. Leinster with the victory. It ended up with kind of some very tense moments. Antoine Hastoy missing a few kicks and a late drop goal attempt that he'll probably be kicking himself about. It could have gone either way, but Leinster go home with the spoils, which for me, I'm quite pleased about because I predicted Leinster to win this game last week. Next game, Bristol Bears versus Benetton. For me, this was a much more exciting game to watch than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, in no small part thanks to Benetton, who really turned up, really fancied it. No, I really enjoyed this game. Bristol were obviously having to contend with quite an extensive injury list that they're having to manage, and you can tell that's having an impact on them at the moment. Yeah. But they still play the way they play, and they kept attacking, they kept going for it. You got guys like Ravuhu in the backs. It'd be a crime not to utilise them. Yeah. Harry Thacker looked fantastic. Looked one of the best games I've seen him play for a while. So they'll be pleased to obviously to get the win and to have survived it. They very nearly didn't, and Benetton I think will be less than pleased to have been denied the opportunity to win this one with a debatable call at the end to disallow their try. This is the sort of game where my old man is spitting feathers in his armchair because of TMO intervention. So a shame for Benton not to win it, but they scored some fantastic tries. Menoncello, alongside Brex, but particularly Menoncello scored a great try. I mean, he is every bit as good as we thought he was.
Yeah. I'd also say that Rhino Smith, he looks some player.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. No, I mean it's a likeable Benetton side. Not least because he's got quite a lot of the starting Italian team, and I've got a real soft spot for the Italians.
But the game ended 35-29, so Benetton within a score, but Bristol taking home the spoils on the day. And then the round itself ended with, which I'm sure Rory's going to remind me of, a victory for Bath over Clermont. Despite me saying that Bath were going to give up on the tournament and Clermont were going to travel and do well, let's just ignore last week's ramblings by me. I thought this was a professional performance from Bath. Their forwards are so physical. They do such a good job. Obviously, the red card for Clermont would have had an impact.
That felt like the turning point. Clermont were getting well back into the game at that point, and Clermont looked good. Clermont looked better than I gave them credit for, really. And actually, had they not had the red card, I think
it was definitely close.
It would have been a much closer game. But Bath in their Rastin 92 cosplay looked really strong. Yeah, so they've got a physical. They've probably got the only pack in the Premiership, maybe barring Saracens, that can go toe to toe with the big French sides.
No.
They're probably the only ones who've got that kind of ability.
Being able to bring Thomas de Toit off the bench does go a long way to help that, I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions around salary caps notwithstanding, that squad itself looks like it could really have a go at this competition if they manage to get through after a couple of poor performances in the first couple of rounds. Big performance from Max Ajomo, who you just hope is going to get a run of games because there is a serious player there. And him and Ollie Lawrence in the centres look a really good partnership.
Agreed.
Unfortunately, the two of them are going to get a commentator sacked at some point because Delalio, for the life of him, could not work out who was who.
I'm glad you picked up on that as well. I was going to say, how frustrating was it the amount of times that they just could not get it right.
It's not that hard. There's literally numbers on their backs.
But yeah, couldn't agree more. That game itself ended 40-21 to Bath. Much needed win for Bath in the tournament after, as you say, a bad start. So it's giving themselves a chance to go to the latter stages. But ultimately, so are there any other stories from the Champions Cup or, let's say, the Challenge Cup? Because I know we don't have enough time in the world to go through the Challenge Cup, but I know your beloved Gloucester may have had a good day in the Challenge.
We had a fantastic day. Friday night, King's Home under the lights, shed roaring, and beating a Scarlet side that was competitive but very well supported. The atmosphere at King's Home, if you've not seen it, is well worth watching some of the highlights for because the Scarlets fans really turned up, reigniting arguments for the Anglo-Welsh League because they properly travelled and they really sung their hearts out through the whole game. Actually, they never quite gave it up in. Actually, ultimately, which was quite a professional performance by Gloucester and quite clinical. You've got to, if you haven't already, you've got to go and watch the Christian Wade try. It's extraordinary. He literally dribbles the ball 80 metres up the pitch. It's phenomenal. Yeah, it's one of the best bit of footballing skills you'll see outside of the Premier League. It's well worth a watch. Gloucester just very, very clinical, took their chances and look like they can have a real go at this competition again, which is great to see. I wanted to give a shout out to the Scarlets fans because they were everything you'd hope a travelling set of fans would be in these kinds of games, and possibly showing why some consideration should maybe be given to the Anglo-Welsh idea.
I feel that we may tackle the Anglo-Welsh League Cup debate at some point in the future, Rory. But for now, we will round up our section on European rugby here because we have some much bigger things to talk about. And those bigger things being international. We're talking Six Nations. We're talking the England squad announced today by Steve Borthwick for the 2025 Six Nations. And there's certainly a few talking points. So let me just quickly run through the squad for anyone who hasn't had the joy of seeing the squad announcement online. In the forwards, we have Finn Baxter, Ollie Chesham, Alex Coles, Luke Cowan-Dickey, Chandler Cunningham-South, Ben Curry, Tom Curry, Theo Dan, Alex Donbrandt, Ben Earl, Ellis Genge, Jamie George, Joe Hayes, Ted Hill, Maro Itoje, George Martin, Asher Opoku-Fajor, Bevan Rodd, Will Stewart, and Tom Willis. So Borthwick was obviously listening last week, which is good. Now to go back to my second, what feels like another register of a class at school. The backs being Oscar Beard, Elliot Daly, Fraser Dingwall, George Ford, Tommy Freeman, Ollie Lawrence, Alex Mitchell, Caden Murley, Harry Randall, Tom Roebuck, Henry Slade, Ollie Slightholm, Finn Smith, Marcus Smith, Freddie Stewart, and Jack Van Portfleet.
Yeah, they talk about squad selection being evolution rather than revolution. And maybe some signs that Borthwick is coming onto land.
Yeah, maybe a couple of gills are covering up. Maybe some of the
Yeah.
webbed toes are losing the webbings. But yeah, safe to say there isn't too much surprise in this squad announcement. Thinking back to
No,
autumn,
he's not a particularly maverick selector, but there's certainly enough quality in there to be excited about it. I mean, the big change is Maro Itoje now taking over the captaincy
absolutely.
from Jamie George, who only had the post for a year. So it feels a little harsh on Jamie. But I get it. You know, Maro's the 80-minute man, and he's captaining Saracens and doing, by all accounts, a good job with that.
So
Yeah,
one thing on the Toji captaincy, which I agree, I've been predicting this for some time. I've always thought he has England captain written over him at some point. Is his penalty magnetism a problem for him being a captain, or will being a captain help his discipline side of his game?
well, I don't think he should lose his edge too much. I think part of what makes Maro so effective is that he often plays it quite close to the line, and you've got to keep that in the game for him to really stand out. And he's taken a couple of sin bins this season, where he's overplayed his hand a bit, but ultimately I wouldn't want him to change too much of what makes him the player that he is. I think part of the reason Maro's possibly the right man for the right moment is he feels to me like a captain for 2025. You know, he's not your 97 Martin Johnson style captain. He's not going to be a screamer. He's quite calm. He's quite considered. He's not a man you can really put in a box easily.
Mm.
And he feels like someone who will be able to communicate effectively with the younger players in that squad.
Yeah.
So to me, it feels like the right decision because I don't think um, there's any other obvious candidates outside of him and Jamie George at the moment.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Looking at that squad in terms of leaders with experience of leading, it is a little bit light on the ground in terms of that. Obviously, George Ford's done a little bit of it at times, but I've never been a fan of, certainly at test level, having your captain in the backs. As good as job Owen Farrell did, I always prefer the captain to be closer to the referee in and around the set piece, because that ultimately is where a lot of the penalties take place. How about those who've missed out? Are there any glaring omissions for you that require a bit more debate?
I mean, glaring one is the tragic omission of the Ginger Flash. Campaign
We
George Hendy
we
is well on
tried.
the way already.
We tried, George. We tried to
We
give you
literally tried
advice.
for a whole week to get you in the England squad, and it hasn't worked. So I can only apologise to George. But in terms of players that missed out, I mean, look, there's the big talking point in terms of players that have missed out is probably Ben Spencer. We've got a few questions on that as well. I I think Ben Spencer's hard done by, and I wouldn't have dropped him for all three of the scrum halves that he picked.
Mm.
I'd like to have seen Rafi Quirk in there personally, probably in place of Jack Van Poorfleet, who I think is maybe not quite reached the levels international for me. But I know Borthwick likes Van Poorfleet, so
Yeah,
sometimes you're going to go back to your favourites.
yeah. And you have to remember, Van Portfleet is still 23, 24 years old.
Yeah,
He's still got plenty of time to develop, whereas Ben Spencer, 32, certainly more in the part of his career where he has his skills, he has his qualities. You know what you get with Spencer. His game management, his kicking from hand is all exceptional. Um, I'm inclined to agree that it does feel a bit harsh that he's been dropped completely. Harry Randall seems to be picked. For me, it seems to suggest that it's showing that Alex Mitchell will be the starting nine, which I think is deserved and justified.
yeah.
But I think the fact that the third scrum half is in the mould of more of an Alex Mitchell than it is of a Ben Spencer or a Van Portfleet suggests that maybe when it comes for training, because let's face it, the third scrum half is there to kind of help to support training and cover if there's an injury. But England do seem all of a sudden to be blessed with 4 or 5 high quality nines, which for some time hasn't been the case.
Yeah,
So
no, it's good to see some competition in that area. I just hope Roughly Quirk gets a run of games and makes a stake in, because that's a player I think's got the highest ceiling, maybe even higher than Alex Mitchell's. I was a bit saddened not to see him picked Max Ajomo, who I think this season has really shown what he's capable of. And the talent's been there for a few years, but again, he's got durability issues. He does seem injury prone. And if you're going to be the guy to take on that 12 mantle, you've just got to be available. So maybe if he puts a string of games together, he'll be on the summer tour. He's got to be in the consideration.
perhaps,
But he's definitely one that I think can feel a little aggrieved to have missed out, because I think the centre selections are a little uninspiring. Yeah,
they're not inspiring, but they're not inspiring in the sense of that there isn't a great deal of choice out there. Notwithstanding a Jomo, who I agree, had he had that performance like he had against Clermont, say 3 weeks ago, and he'd kept that form, he may well have found himself in that squad, because I thought on this weekend in particular, he looked absolutely class in that 12 shirt. I'm just really worried that we're just going to see another 5 rounds of the Slade-Lawrence centre partnership that just doesn't seem to work.
We are. I do. Borthwick has no imagination. But the best in the world, he just doesn't have an imagination.
And I would absolutely love it if Borthwick was to surprise us and actually start Dingwall and Beard, because they've warranted and earned that to be looked at as well. But I just don't see it happening. I'm really excited by Oscar Beard as a player, as the potential he has. He's still a young player. He's got a high ceiling. He reminds me a lot, actually, of Hugh Jones, both in the way he plays and physically he looks quite similar to Hugh Jones. He has a striking resemblance.
David raised serious questions there for Oscar Beard's mother or Hugh Jones's father.
So moving on, so how do we think the back row's going to look in this England squad? There's no Underhill. Tom Willis is in the squad. We're happy with that. Who gets that 6 shirt? Is it Cunningham South? Is it Ted Hill? Or does he continue with the Ollie Chesham, George Martin experiment?
I suspect against France and Ireland in particular, he'll pick Chesham at 6 if he can. And I think just to try and combat their packs, and I don't think that's a bad way to go about it. But possibly in the opportunities where he can get a little bit of a faster track and an opportunity to get a more mobile pack out there. I think someone like Ted Hill has a really good shot of playing 6. I'm hoping that in either case he goes with Erlen Willis in a 7 and 8 shirt. Obviously, both Currys are there, and it's hard to imagine them never picking Tom Curry, because everyone always picks Tom Curry, even if it means that Tom Curry ends up having to have stem cells injected into his hip.
That's okay.
Keep him,
that's okay.
That's fine. We'll just keep picking him. So I'm hopeful that they're going to try and utilise that pairing that Saracens have used to quite good effect this season with Erlen Willis. I think as long as Tom Willis goes into every training session between now and the Six Nations, looks at Alex Donbran and go, in this session, I'm going to do more than you in everything we train on, Tom Willis will have to get selected. I think it would astound me if he doesn't get
Does Tom Willis start round 1?
For me, he does, because I think we're going to need that kind of power against Ireland. I just don't think we can hope to replicate the performance last year with the same team, because I think without Underhill, I don't think Tom Curry replaces Underhill in that equation. And I think Bernal has still got the ability and he's still got all the same attributes, but he's a marked man now, and I think they've got to bring some different problems for Ireland to combat with, and that's where I think someone like Tom Willis, he has to command attention.
Yes.
In defence.
Almost the selection of Tom Willis releases Ben Earl of that carrying responsibility, and it may actually make for Ben Earl being able to fill those Underhill boots in defence and being an absolute pest around the breakdown. I'm hoping that's what Willis will kind of some of the unseen or the unexpected impacts of that selection would do, because at the moment Ben Earl has to do such a huge amount of the carrying for that side to get them over the gain line. You can't expect him to be doing everything. Tom Willis takes a huge burden off of Ben Earl if he's selected.
We've got to pick ball carriers, which
Yeah.
means for me you have to pick Earl and Willis. You've got to get more out of Ollie Lawrence. You need to utilise Freddie Stewart in a really effective way. You probably need to pick at least one nuggety winger, and you've got to get more out of Ellis Genge.
Yeah, but who are your starting wingers?
I think, assuming they're all fit, the chances are it'll be Slightholme and Freeman.
Yeah.
I think based on this squad selection, Borthwick is planning a 6-2 split, which is why I think Daly's been picked. So, assuming I'm right on that, and I always like to assume I am, I think Daly's on the bench, but you start Freeman, Slightholme, and Stewart, which that's a great breakthrough, right? In theory,
yeah, and form, all on form. Only question mark is Slightholme fitness at the moment, but assuming
in which case I'd probably pick Caden Murley, actually.
Yeah, same. That's who I would pick. That's certainly
probably.
Who I'd pick.
And I really like Tom Roebuck, and I think Tom Roebuck's a really, really good winger. But he's very similar to Freeman.
Yes.
Physically, but also in terms of his attributes. Caden Murley brings something a little bit different, but chances are I'll just go with Daly. But
chances are he'll just recall Dan Cole and put him on the wing.
Do you know what? I don't hate it.
Great try scoring record. Great try scoring record this season for the Tigers. So
yeah.
In propping, I suppose we should talk a little bit about Asher Opoku-Fajor.
Yeah, actually had a bit of a tough time on the pitch when he came on at the weekend. He struggled a little bit. I think, I think he probably is starting on the bench. I think Will Stewart's got the 3 shirts sewn up for the time being as a starter. Joe Hayes has had a really good season, but when I look at Joe Hayes with my propping eye, I'm not certain he's got the right physique for international tight head. When I finally established the Democratic People's Republic of Front Rows and am elected as Supreme Leader, and I start to categorise everyone physically, Joe Hayes would be the lanky one.
Where am I in the government and the Democratic Republic of Props?
You are Minister of Foreign Affairs. So when this is really, really boring propping mindset, right? But when you look at a prop, one of the things that makes a big difference is where their kind of centre of gravity is. So someone like Asher Opoku-Fajor is all thighs and arse.
Yeah,
it's very similar to someone like Fasogban, who's obviously injured for this squad. But if you look at someone like Oxen Che, even Thomas de Toit, they're all thighs and arse. They've got a really low centre of gravity, which makes a really big difference in terms of how you balance in the scrum. It means you can get just such great power.
Yeah,
Joe Hayes he's actually quite long-legged, and they're not. His legs aren't. I mean, this is all relative to prop him, right? His legs are fucking huge. He's got massive legs, but the way that Joe Hayes scrums is he levers out because he's got those long legs. But if you're up against someone like an Oxen Che who can get underneath you, which he just can, even as low as Joe Hayes can get, Oxenchade's going to get underneath him and overpower him.
Yeah. So the only prop I could think of off the top of my head who's probably got that lanky physique you're referring to was probably like Carl Heyman. He's kind of got
Yeah,
that long leg. So if Joe Hayes can go away and look at how Carl Heyman became a world class prop, what he
he would
does in
have
the
to be the
squads,
model of it. But Cole Heyman was a freak.
yeah,
Cole Heyman was freakishly strong,
yeah,
and he could get freakishly low for a big man.
yeah. Interestingly, Fassabon was also listed on the injured missing players list in the England rugby squad announcement, which I thought was interesting.
On
The
this
way
occasion,
he was playing,
he was playing well in terms of his scrummaging was really strong, but he's not quite there in terms of applying himself physically around the pitch in terms of his tackles and carries. I think because he's probably focusing on his set piece, which is fair enough for a young player.
yeah.
He may well have been in the squad as a development player. I would have been surprised if he'd have made it as a full squad
Has
player.
there been any development players announced with this squad that you've seen? Because I've not seen
None.
any.
No, not that I've seen.
And I say that because I'm really hoping one name will be there. And we've not mentioned his name yet, at least not in the Six Nations section. That's Henry Pollock.
Yeah, I think he's there for the A team. I think they're really viewing these A games as development squads, and I think they're working to get more fixtures for the A team. Pollock will be in that. I've got no doubt.
He has to
Got
be.
no doubt.
Or
I think he'd probably captain it. Would be my guess.
or do they run him out for the under-20s and the under-26 nations, which for me would be probably unnecessary because I think
I don't think it's worth it. I don't think you'll get anything more in terms of development for him, and you just block another under-20s player from that experience. I think he's more likely to play for the England A's and maybe come in as a development player at some point. Borthwick name checked him in his conference, and he said, it's a matter of when, not if. And if you look overall, it's actually still quite a young squad.
Mm.
I would think the average age is probably somewhere around 25, 26 in that squad. So you've got to account for that that need for some experience in there as well. Yeah. And there's, other than probably Elliot Daly, maybe Jamie George, no one in there is likely to miss out age-wise on the next World Cup. So it's not a rush to get Pollock in, but I'm expecting him to be in the summer.
That brings us on to Q&A.
Do we have a jingle for Q&A?
I wish we had a jingle for Q&A. Also, to the listener out there, we are on the lookout for a jingle for the podcast. So if you have any jingles in your back pocket that are ready to go, send them to us at rucksmallsoverballs@outlook.com, along with any questions. So one thing I will say, compared to last week, where we had one question, we have been absolutely inundated with questions this week. And it's been really good to see. We're going to have to be very selective with questions and pick from just a few because ultimately we've only got so much time. The first question we've had in, and one I'm going to ask you, Rory, because I'm really interested in your answer to this. What is your opinion on having away ends, dedicated away sections, should we say, in a rugby stadium?
I understand it as an idea because there are too many stadiums where there isn't a lot of atmosphere. If you think about it, King's Home's the only stadium with a dedicated stand that is lively. That everyone wants to get into. All the other stadiums, it's very piecemeal, and you're just hoping that you create an atmosphere. And they do, a lot of teams do create atmosphere. The Stoop often has a very good atmosphere. Obviously, a lot of the French teams have very good atmospheres.
Franklin's Gardens.
Franklin's Gardens is, full of one-eyed people booing, but that's fine. That's up to them.
That was only against Bath.
I'm not in favour of this on the basis that I think it's artificial. And ultimately, you can't have an away stand where it's just maybe 500 travelling fans in red trousers, not actually doing a lot of singing and chanting. I don't think you get anything out of it in a rugby stadium because there's just not that culture of it.
Mm.
Um, what you probably need to do is try and replicate more of an atmosphere at say like a T20 match, where there's obviously no home and away ends, but there's a bit more of a carnival atmosphere around it.
Mm.
Um, I think trying to recreate a football atmosphere is a bit of a mugs game at this point because there's just no culture of it amongst the fans. And with the best in the world, your average rugby fan's not really the type to go full, ultra hooligan at a rugby
And
match.
I'm definitely not promoting the idea of hooliganism or tribalism coming into rugby, because I think that goes against everything in the values of rugby. I think the only where this question comes from is that last season Harlequins saw some real good stuff about their fans being able to pick up pockets of away tickets at, say, Bordeaux in the semi-final, and the players acknowledged that and noticed that, and they really liked the fact that when they went to France, there was a section in the stand they could look to for motivation. So from that point of view, there's an argument for it for me, but I do agree. I don't want it to be an artificial look at this latest fad we're trying and make the sport more likable to more different types of people.
Yeah, I think pockets of fans is great. Pockets of fans sort of bouncing off each other, but an away end does nothing for me. I don't want a stand dedicated to away fans because actually, because I've been in those pockets of fans in away games, and actually the interaction you have with the home fans is some of the most fun part of it, particularly when you go to France.
That's what makes it special. Is having a pocket is great, but you don't want an entire section dedicated to it, because then you're removing that interaction with the home fans. And let's face it, in the Premiership, if Newcastle were to travel to Exeter and an entire stand or section of a stand was dedicated to Newcastle fans, I imagine there'll be a lot of tickets not sold, and then it's clubs missing out on revenue. That was my question to you, Rory. Do you have any questions from our long list of questions that you think may be of interest to you in asking me?
Yeah. So one that we haven't really covered is any of the other home nations and some of their squads. We've seen the Welsh squad be announced. Sort of tangentially to that, is Thomas Williams in the driving seat for the starting Lions shirt?
Ooh. And I'm sure by no ways motivated from your Gloucester. I
am a neutral.
Yeah, a heavily neutralised question. One, ultimately, Thomas Williams. Looking at the facts, for me, he has been, for certain, the signing of the season in the Premiership. He's up there in the conversation of player of the season in the Premiership. He's got to be Wales's starting nine. And for want of being kind to my home nation, of me being a quarter Welsh, I don't see there being a great deal of Welsh representation on the Lions tour this year. But having said that, I think Thomas Williams is probably, between him and Jack Morgan, are the two, for me, that are real strong arguments to be not just involved on being on the plane, but being part of the Test match 23. Whether Williams gets the starting shirt will be a tough one, because for me, in my head, I think it's a balancing act between Gibson Park, Mitchell, and Williams. I think those are the three I would take. They're all quite different. They all offer different things. Williams is certainly in with a shout with getting that starting 9 shirt. I have a feeling Farrell will lean towards Gibson Park, but I think Williams is probably the more exciting pick.
Feels like he'd dovetail with Finn Russell well.
He would work very, very well with Finn Russell at 10. And if Lions are able to take a pack that could get a lot of front football, I would be incredibly excited to watch Williams and Russell collaborate at 9 and 10 in a Lions shirt.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, as good a player as Gibson Park is, and he is, he's much more of a, keep things ticking along kind of player, works really well in the Irish system. If you're trying to get the best out of more maverick players like Finn Russell, you need someone who's got that kind of mindset. And Thomas Williams, I think, has proven this season with Gloucester that he's more than capable of rising to that challenge. So he'd be in the driving seat for me. I wouldn't discount Alex Mitchell entirely, particularly if there's a strong Six Nations. But I think Thomas Williams edges it for me, speaking as a complete neutral.
I could sense the neutral in your voice.
Heavily neutral. There was one question about, will Bath's 258th planning application be successful? Are Bath going to get a proper stadium, David?
Well, looking at their plans, these actually look like well thought through plans. I'd say when I say advanced stage, it's still just drawings on bits of paper and kind of PDF files. But they are actually presenting something to the people of Bath to try and get it through these planning constraints that they have to live amongst. The fact that their stadium, the Rec, is a very beautiful setting. It's a beautiful stadium to go to, beautiful part of town. But it's
not the bit that's made out of scaffolding.
Well, yeah, the temporary stands aren't the best. And I imagine that they would absolutely love nothing more than not having to take that up and down every single summer. But can they get this past the Bath Council or whatever the restrictions are in place that are stopping them from doing this? I've seen the drawings. It looks beautiful. It looks like it'll be a really great thing.
Yeah.
And I will hold my hands up and say Bath is probably one of my favourite away trips to go to. Going and standing in the Thatcher stand is good fun. As you say, going and standing in lively parts of a stadium as an away fan is always entertaining. I've enjoyed it every time I've gone there. You always get a good crack with the fans. It's right in the middle of town. I hope it comes through, because if not, the only option is to move it outside of the town, and I think that'll change the away day completely.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, and I think it will never get built.
And on that note, we will bring the podcast to a close. Ultimately, another cracking performance from us both, I must say. Not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but 2 episodes in, and we're flying.
I mean, we're like old pros at this already.
Absolutely. No, but jokings aside, thank you for sticking around and listening to us and indulging us in this adventure we're going on with Rucks, Mauls and Overballs. I very much mean it when I say please do send questions or jingles or anything to the email address rucksmallsoverballs@outlook.com, or contact us on Instagram or TikTok, where you will find pages for us. We very much enjoy having that interaction with the fans, because, as we said in episode 1, this podcast is for the fans, by us as fans. We don't have professional players in this podcast. That is why we are different.
No, and we never will, if I've got anything to say about
it. Yeah. One thing to look forward to. Next week, we have our very first guest. I'll leave it all up in the air for you to try and figure out who it is. I guarantee you won't figure it out. But we got our very first guest joining us next week on the podcast to talk about lots of different things and have a good conversation with them about another part of the game that we haven't touched on yet. But I'm very excited for that conversation. But from me, all I can say is thank you for listening, and a goodbye from me. Any final words from you, Rory?
Well, it's a goodbye from me, and it's a goodbye from him.
Till next time.